Happy History Day 2020 from the Working Class Movement Library. And thanks for joining us as we launch our new podcast, Begin the World Over Again. We've a variety of contributors today who will be sharing their thoughts about the project. This event is also part of the national Being Human Festival of the Humanities, which is taking place across the UK between 12th and the 22nd of November. Being Human is run by the School of Advanced Study, University of London, in partnership with the Arts and Humanities Research Council and the British Academy. Events are mostly online this year, and you can see the full programme online at www.beinghumanfestival.org, and I've put more information about the festival in the chat. The library's events are, as usual, free. However, we would like to encourage you to support the library if you're able to do so, and there's a donate button on our website. So without further ado, let's make a start by listening to a clip from our podcast.
Would you like to listen to the trailer first? Yeah, sure.
These are radical times. What does a welfare state mean in 2020? Why is now the time to take on racism? How can collective voices join together for change? Seeking lessons from the changemakers of history, Begin the World Over Again is a podcast about radical thoughts and actions for radical times. Coming soon from Walk the Plank and the Working Class Movement Library.
Great, thanks, Sean. So the podcast is coming very soon. In fact, it's arrived today as part of the Being Human Festival and also History Day, like Lynette said. I'm Ben, and I work for a company called Walk the Plank, who are based in Salford, just down the road from the library. And the Walk the Plank and the library first worked together last year on a project called The Bones of Pain. And you can hear more about Thomas Paine. He's one of the subjects of the podcasts. This project was thought of in the first lockdown, and we applied to the emergency fund from the Arts Council with the idea of creating a sort of digital representation of some of the fantastic material that are in the library's archives. We worked with 6 different duos, each featuring an artist and a member of the writing group. In the Bones of Pain project last year, one of the unexpected highlights was the writing group, who were formed for that project. And both the people who were part of it, the writers and the library on Walk the Plank, we felt it would be great to build on that unexpected outcome and do some more project work, which is how Begin the World Over Again started. We're going to hear some clips from the different podcasts, some of the different episodes, and we're also going to hear from some of the duos. That'll be the kind of first half, and then in the second half we're going to hear from a couple of colleagues from the University of Salford, who are just going to talk about how engagement is a kind of form of creative practice, and there'll be chances for questions as well. So the first episode that we're launching today is entitled Inspiring Women and Women Who Are Inspiring. And I wonder if we could hear a clip from that first.
Women have the right to vote. Can you think of any issues still facing women in terms of equality?
Inspiring women and women who are inspiring.
But you see, people talk about the suffragette movement, but you could go back even further than that. And in the middle of the last century, women in the cotton mills in the north of England were fighting then for abortion facilities and for better education and for nurseries.
Women have the right to vote. Can you think of any issues still facing women in terms of equality? I think we've come a long way, certainly over the last 100 years.
When the suffragettes pushed for the vote for women, now we're going back 100 years, there was anarchy. I don't think the struggle ever stops. And I say that in relation to any kind of isolation and marginalisation and injustice, and lack of equality. I think you have to, every generation is going to have to fight
Brilliant. So I'd like to just bring in Helen Jackson next, who it was half of the duo who has been working on that episode. Hi, Helen.
Hi, Ben. Hi, everybody.
And,
nice to meet Jan and Chris, by the way.
I wondered if you would say a bit more about how you and Sarah approached your theme in terms of gathering audio for the episode.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the lovely things about this project was the themes started off being very general. So the duos working together, we had a very, very wide-ranging format that we could develop from. The challenge to that was that Sarah and I didn't know each other, never heard of each other, and we only had one opportunity to actually meet up face to face, as it were. So we met safely outside in a garden early August. Developed some ideas which changed, but then of course then we couldn't meet at all after that. So it was all Zoom, phone calls, emails, all that sort of thing. And really, I think our aim overall was to make something that sounded different, because we hoped that would get people to listen, and to offer a space for voices to be heard that perhaps aren't always given as much prominence as they should be. And we did start off very much that this had to, as far as possible, be focused around Salford. Which again, to be quite honest, was a bit of a challenge for us, because neither of us has lived there or does live there now. So a lot of things that we had to work on.
Great, and you spoke to about 20 women and young women. Yeah.
We did. We went, I mean, you start off thinking, oh my God, no one will want to talk to us. And then you start to think through your networks and other people's networks. And we ended up between us with interviews with about 20 women. We had a big discussion that would we interview men as well? And, you know, it was something that we had a different view on. And in the end, I have to say that we went with my view, was that if it's something about women's voices, we want it to be exclusively women's voices. And then the really hard thing was, people spoke to us. We got some fantastic audio, and from such a range of people, all of whom had some Salford link, which may not immediately have been obvious. But, and then we had to do the awful thing, because we started with 10 questions that we thought weren't going to be a frame, they were a loose framework rather than a corset to structure discussion. But we made the mistake of putting the first question as, well, tell us a bit about yourself. Whoa, you know, what we'd anticipated was, I'm so-and-so, so-and-so, this is me. But no, almost, not everyone, but almost everyone we spoke to wanted to tell us loads and loads and loads about their life. And that was fabulous. But a lot of that, we've had to leave on, I don't know what you call it, the digital floor. It's there still, all those stories waiting to be told. And we've eked out a skeleton around inspiration and equality and issues that women face and continue to face, and how they combat them.
And then I remember, Helen, when you shared the sort of clip of one of the early interviews you had done with Kerry.
Yes.
And I listened to it, and there was almost a whole episode in that one interview.
There was.
And I think that's been replicated.
Yeah. Can I just say as well about Kerry's interview, and there were one of the things that really, really struck me, and Kerry is speaking as a community activist, someone who's got 3 part-time jobs, who lives in Salford, who, you know, my goodness, what a powerhouse. And I would think of myself as reasonably politically active, you know, in all sorts of ways. But what Kerry said, and I thought it was so important that we can you know, we could perhaps get lost in a sort of almost philosophical approach to begin the world over. And when I said, you know, what would you like life to be for your children, particularly your daughter? And she said, I want them to have good jobs where they earn lots of money. I want them to be able to buy their own house. I want them to each have a car. And I thought, you know, it's very easy for us not to hear that voice and those aspirations. And whether or not we agree with those, my goodness, were they heartfelt, you know, and it was a really important thing to hear.
And the approach that Helen and Sarah have taken is to kind of weave the different voices together. And we'll put some information in the chat on how you can hear the full podcast. Each episode is about 30 minutes in length, but we're just going to hear another quick snippet from Inspiring Women and Women.
Can I just say
yes,
that Sarah should be here as well. And Sarah has just worked phenomenally hard. It has been an absolute joy and an inspiration to work with Sarah. And she's worked, you know, goodness knows how many hours to put this together. She's the sound artist, the composer, and she's now got a migraine today. It's almost like she pushed herself. So she really, really wanted to be here. And it's a real shame that she can't be.
Thanks, Helen. And yes, just to echo that as well, we'll just hear another quick clip from this episode.
Can you think of a time when you've been confronted by inequality because you're female? How did you deal with this moment? How did it make you feel? There's so many instances, really.
You know, it starts early and it keeps going. As a young woman, as a teenager, and, you know, in my early 20s, I mean, I could give you a long list of experiences, some really harrowing.
Personally, I think at the minute, there's more issues with men.
But actually, generally, I haven't come across discrimination on grounds of my gender.
When I'm at school, I like to play basketball, but the boys don't usually pass to me. I think this happens because I'm a girl and they think I'm weak.
And when I'm doing football with the boys, it feels like I'm left out because when I come on the football pitch, I tell someone to pass to me. They don't pass to me, and that makes me sad, and then they don't involve me in the game.
Great. So we're now going to hear from another duo who have been exploring the kind of ideas around, is there grass growing in between the cobbles, roaming in and around the Working Class Movement Library archives? So Hilary and Danielle, I wondered if you could just say a little bit about how you've approached your episode, maybe starting with Hilary, if that's okay. Hi, Hilary.
Hi there. We actually started at the library to explore the archives there, and the absolutely outstanding one from Benny Rothman, who led the Kinder Trespass. And I think the overall structure of our episode is exploring the idea of trespass through discussing with different people the controversies about the trespass, and then bring it back into the present with controversies that are very much live in Salford and Manchester now, and bringing in the voices of they are mainly women who are leading a different kind of walk in the city as well, because we wanted to compare city and country, just as Benny Rothman did. You know, he went from the city into the countryside. So we wanted to tell that story, but in sound, and bringing in as many ideas as we could from people who'd experienced this, either at the trespass or thinking about the trespass or engaging with it, all those issues now, which are very real. Yeah.
And yeah, it's one of the constants of the last 9 months has been sort of access to open spaces and green spaces.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, it got more and more provoking in a way, because we were particularly tied down by lockdown and quarantine and shielding and all the rest of it. And yet, you know, we were wanting to really explore that idea of access and the importance of it, of the spaces. Yeah. We did. I don't think we did. Definitely, it did mean that we didn't do as much of the work on the episode, the actual sound, as much as we would have perhaps have hoped. What I mean is we didn't do as, the lockdown meant that we didn't do as much work actually on the sounds and the actual episode together as much as we would have liked. But as Helen said, loads of emails and all those sort of exchanges, you know, on and on and on.
Yeah, when we started the project towards the end of July, and at that point it looked like things were moving towards being able to, you know, meet face to face. And certainly, yeah. I think all the duos and Sean, who's been working on the project from a social media perspective, everybody could visit the library, and so we were sort of getting underway with that. And then obviously things changed again, and then have changed since. But I think it's a real sort of credit and testimony to the duos that in addition to getting to know each other and collaborate with each other in quite a small space of time, they've produced these amazing records which not only celebrate the library, but also are kind of about this moment in time as well, and about about how people, I think, are looking forward as well. And I'd just like to bring Danielle in at this point, who was the artist working alongside Hilary. And Danielle, is there anything you'd like to add to how you've been working?
I think Hilary covered it all, really. Yeah, so we just spoke to a mixture of current campaigners and people who raising the issue about accessibility to open spaces, and then also the contrast between urban spaces and actually in the countryside. And then we tried as well, so the original concept was that we were going to take you, as in the listener, on a tour, but that hasn't exactly how it works, because obviously then we weren't allowed to go out anymore. So we're sort of taking you on a tour around Greater Manchester, speaking to these different campaigners. All become clear when you listen to it.
Absolutely. I mean, could I just come back for a minute? Because although physically we weren't able to meet anything like as much as we could, or work on it together as much as we would have liked, I began to feel that actually, although we had these designations, writer and producer, we were both, in a sense, both composers. And I began to feel that was a more helpful way of thinking about how to approach it.
Great, and we've got a short clip of this episode that we'll just hear now.
I was born in Manchester in 1911, in Cheetham. The only grass that we saw was the grass growing in between the cobbles.
Benny Rothman became the figurehead for youth rambling movements. The Kindertrespass, it's literally become like one of England's most modern and empowering legends.
To me, green spaces are a chance to relax and unwind, somewhere where I can forget about the troubles of the day.
Hear that? Locked for some time. It's dirty and rusty and it's not been opened. But that is blocking a public right of way.
They recognise it as being a strategic route number one. Why then do they decide that they must close it?
There's a big issue with campaigning. There was a campaign for Library Walk in Manchester. It was the people versus the most expensive lawyer in the country that the council had appointed. So it's really daunting to know what to do.
The streets belong to everybody, and I really believe that, but unfortunately it isn't true at the moment.
Yeah, so not all of the episodes will be released today. So the one we heard from first is available to listen now, and then over the next 3 weeks the other episodes will be. So that's coming early next week. The next person it'd be good to hear from is from Tracy, and Tracy's been working with a artist called Alison Surtees, and their episode explores the theme: can solidarity make a comeback? Tracy, would you say a little bit more? Thanks.
Well, our podcast is about the general strike of 1926. And then we look at how Ewan McCall comes into the story with his pit and factory papers, so educating people. And we have a discussion about why was a 26 general strike so important, and what was it about that strike that made it special. And then we have a discussion with some young political activists, people who are political activists now. And then we talk about solidarity and what it means, and can we get it back again? Can we find it again?
And do you think, Tracy, that's something, that idea of solidarity, that maybe we've lost sight of a little bit? And
yeah, definitely. And I think when people listen to our podcast, it'll stir up ideas about what does it mean, solidarity.
Great, thank you. And in terms of the process of working alongside Alison, because you've not done a podcast before, how has that been?
No, well, it's been really hard and brilliant at the same time, if you know what I mean. Really like melted our brains, but then we managed to get something done, so it's been good. We were far too ambitious at first. Well, I was. I had like loads of really mad ideas that I had to come to realise weren't possible. So then we had to like think, well, how can we do it then? And I feel sorry for the artist that she got the short straw with me, I reckon, because I had all these wild ideas, and yet she's actually a producer, so she understands that that's not going to work. That's not going to work. So she had to put up with that for a while. It was a while before I realised that it was too ambitious. So then I think once I'd realised that, I think she could relax a bit more then, because I understand that this has to be produced. And yeah,
I think that's, you know, quite often on a project there's that kind of shape where there's so many different ideas, particularly when the starting point is something like the library's collection, where you could go in numerous directions, and then, you know, getting things kind of succinct is a real challenge. Thanks, Tracy. We're now going to hear a clip from a different episode, which is the episode which is entitled How Can Engels Show Us the Way Forward Beyond 2020 as we ensure that an ounce of action is worth a ton of theory.
He is not wise who from his reading draws nothing but floods of erudition. For all his learning, life's mysterious laws are a closed book beyond his comprehension. He who acquires a thorough textbook grounding in botany won't hear the grass that grows, nor will he ever reach true understanding who tells you all the dogma that he knows. Oh no, the germ lies hid in man's own heart, who seeks the act of life must look within. Burning the midnight oil will not impart the secret of emotion's discipline. The man is lost who hears his own heart's voice and spurns it, willfully misapprehending of all your words, so noble and so wise, the most profound is human understanding.
Brilliant. It's quite emotional sitting and listening to these clips, because it's sort of the first or second time that we've heard them as well. So, and they're just an instant kind of portal into wanting to know more about the subjects and things put together. So this episode has been put together by composer Alan Williams, working with Christina McAlpine, who are both here as well, I think. So Alan, would you say a bit about how you approached the subject of Engels, and yeah.
Sure, yeah. Hi, I'm Alan. I work with Christina on the Engels episode. I think we met up in the library a couple of times, and first of all, yeah, we the scrapbook, you know, it was just so much information there, and so many ways you could take just so many lines you could go down from the scrapbook alone, you know. But yeah, once we realized we didn't want to do like a straightforward kind of question interview thing, we wanted it more to be like a soundscape, you know, with music and sound and interviews, and just, so once we realized that, it was kind of we both kind of clicked on that straight away, you know. So that was great. And then I think there was a quote somebody said about Engels. He experienced Manchester through his feet, through his heels, through his senses, you know. So we just met up, I think, every week then, and just kind of done the I came off Piccadilly and we would meet and we would just take a hard right and do the outskirts of the city, just where the old warehouses and mills and factories and all, you know, and just kind of started talking to people and recording sounds from that area, just, you know. And it kind of came organically like that. We didn't really have a working title for us was kind of Wandering with Engels, you know, just kind of retracing the steps, you know, that kind of just as a working title to just get some kind of atmosphere, and thinking about a narrator as well. Who did we want our narrator to be, you know? Yeah, so those kind of questions, we didn't really decide on them straight away. We just let them kind of organically come, you know. And then our first interview was in a pub. I think every time we met people, we broke lots of laws, because everything was during quarantine or lockdown or curfews, you know. And we met in a pub, and it was so noisy. And I knew that these people there was a curfew at 10 o'clock, and I couldn't ask them to. I asked them to turn the music down because we were trying to record, but it was like they were watching the football match in the background, and I couldn't stop them from watching the match in the pub because nobody could get out. It was like, you know, it had to close at 10 o'clock. So all the kind of interviews we got were under these kind of pressures, you know, with quarantine and lockdown and meeting people and just even, I think we wanted to record people face to face rather than do it through Zoom or through phone call or something like that, you know. Yeah, that meant something to us.
And yeah, I remember meeting up in the middle of sort of August, and you and Christina just saying, when I said, how have you been approaching it? And you just said, well, we go for walks. I thought it's a really good way of also listening, as you know, and to podcast as well. Christina, is there anything that you would like to add as well to what Alan said about the process from your perspective?
Just that I think part of the reason why we did do it so organically is because when we were first in the library, we couldn't help but both of us, sort of without talking about it and not having met before, seemed to pick out the most human touches that were in the archives. So we went for cartoons that Engels had drawn, little scribbles, you know, some of them a little bit rude, and it was like there was a real person there, and also the song, the poem that you heard spoken just now, you know, Engels wrote that, so you know, he was a poet, he was an artist. And so it spoke to us of a real humanity, and I think that's why we wanted then, once we'd listened, and because the tape there as well, and absorbed Engels, we wanted to go out onto the streets, and we wanted to actually not only just walk in his footsteps, but sort of carry his words through into 2020 and hear what people had to say. We might only mention the name Engels, and then they'd go and they'd start talking about him, and they knew all about him, and they'd tell us all about Angel Meadows in Manchester. If you don't know, you need to Google or whatever you do. And you know, it was, or listen to our podcast, even better. And then there was you know, so many people that actually did know the name. You know, it might be surprising, but there were, and it awoke something in them. You know, this idea there are so many socialists in Manchester, as Engels said himself. You know, we really felt that, and the things that they had to say, you know, were about taking socialism forward, about the ideas of Engels and how, you know, their lives have been touched by those ideas of equality, and so we felt very inspired to go on and speak to the next person and the next person, and in their own ways, in very different ways. You can tell that every single person has been inspired in some way to do something with their lives to make the world a better place. So it was really inspiring to do.
Yeah, thank you. And that sort of thing about inspiration from the past is very much behind the thinking of the project, that ideas that maybe 12 months ago seemed really radical you know, in the current landscape suddenly maybe seem a bit less radical, and there's definitely some suggestions and solutions from the past that we can learn from. I suppose one of the disadvantages of podcast is that you don't sort of get to see people's appreciation or thanks. So I wonder if we could just have in a minute a sort of short round of applause or thumbs up or hand waving for Christina and Alan, and also Tracy, and also Danielle and Hilary and Helen too. So yeah, thanks very much. Great, and then there's a couple of other duos who aren't with us today. So there's also episode 4 is entitled "The Establishment and the Welfare State: How Much Pain Before We Change the World," and that's composer and sound designer Dan Steele working with Peter Wright. And then our last episode is titled "How Do We Continue the Fight Against Institutional Racism in Britain Today?" And that's an artist, Leigh Carbon-Wilson, working with Gemma Bromley. So that they've sent their apologies today. So altogether there will be 6 episodes. In about 5 minutes' time, or sooner if no one's got any questions, we're going to hear from Ali and also from Sam. But I wondered if anybody who's joined, and thanks everyone for coming along today, if anybody had any questions they wanted to ask, either a general question or a specific question to any of the duos. And you can put them in the chat as well if there's anything you... Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes.
I'm just wondering. I know that it's been really difficult with lockdown and so on. Did you have any people that had volunteered beforehand and then you haven't been able to contact, or you've been doing it by writing, or you're going to do later on, or is it only people who can talk online, sort of thing? I'm just thinking a lot of older people aren't online, and that creates a problem.
Helen, do you want to say something then, Hilary?
Yes, I mean, I take your point completely. And all our interviews were done over Zoom, or occasionally people would record something on their phone. But the really, really hard thing for me early on was we made contact with Betty Tebbs's daughter. And we didn't particularly want to, I mean, you know, Betty Tebbs's life is well documented, but what we were interested in is, you know, what's it like to live with an inspiring woman? Do inspiring women know when, do you know what, I just need to stop and put my feet up and all that sort of thing? Is it sometimes a bit overwhelming to have a mother who's, you know, this iconic figure? So there are all sorts of interesting questions, but there was no way that we could get a digital interview done. I mean, it's perhaps reassuring to know that I couldn't work out, and other people couldn't work out how to record a phone conversation, which a couple of years ago I think probably would have been quite easy. So that was a frustration early on, and I probably spent a fortnight thinking there must be a way, and there wasn't. So we just had to say, you know, so as far as our podcast is concerned, that was one thing we couldn't do because all the rest were digital.
Thank you, Helen. And Hilary, did you want to just add something as well? Hilary, you'll just need to unmute. Thank you.
Yes, there were 2 actually absolutely key people in our episode who out of choice have never ever been online or used the internet or any form of any sort of social media. So it was very much back to basics, and in Danielle's case, a bicycle, I think, and meeting up as best we could manage with them. But they were absolutely crucial to them because they were kind of like, for me, they were the sort of hinge back to the trespass and then on to the present and the future. So that took a whole load of extra effort and time and complication, but absolutely critical, yeah. And now, you know, so now the question is, how will they then access their episode or our episode? But they're very, actually, I mean, just to be very positive, and one of the themes that came out in talking to them was how much they actually, in their veteran campaigners, have actually realised that by linking with people who do use social media, that they can actually extend their campaigns and information and get more and more collective action going. So that was very positive.
Thanks, Hilary. And Danielle, you would like to just add something as well.
Yeah, just that those two people in question were Don Lee and Gloria Gaffney. And like Hilary said, they weren't online, and Hilary knew them. She was like, we've got to find these people. And I actually ended up trying to be a detective to try and find them. And it was purely by accident. This is why it's such a nice story. But when we were trying to find sources of who we wanted to speak, I was just looking at the internet and looking at walking groups. And I rang one group because she had something to do with a project in Salford. And I was like, I don't suppose you know this Don Lee and Gloria Gaffney? And she's like, oh, I met them years ago. I've got a whole load of folders. Let me go through. I rang her back in half an hour and she had this telephone number. It was a landline. And she's like, oh, I don't know if this works. And then so I finally got hold of Gloria, and then still, so they could see what we were going to talk about. Like Hilary said, my bike, I had to print off some questions, cycle to her house, and drop them off. So it was all really old school. And then it was when you still could meet people out and about. So then we did their interview outside. But it was just, the whole process, it was really fulfilling at the end that we managed to get hold of them, because like Hilary said, they're very vital to the story.
And there's a second part of the project which is sort of on hold at the moment, which is about working with 4 different youth groups in Salford to kind of pick up on the podcasts. We managed to do a couple of sessions over in Little Hulton with Youth Unity, and some of those voices are in Sarah and Helen's podcast, but we just sort of got underway with it, and then things were on pause again. And just picking up in the chat as well, a question about transcripts. And some of the episodes have musical accompaniment quite strongly, and some of them are just spoken word as well. But certainly in terms of having written transcripts, that's something we can look into. And there's more information on the project on the library's website, which also just has some of those kind of starting points as well. A slight omission on my part that I hadn't noticed that Peter was here. And I just wouldn't, Peter worked on the Thomas Paine podcast. So just before we move on, Peter, I wondered if you would just say a little bit about working with Dan. Great.
Well, I didn't know anything about podcasts. We had an open brief. I don't think any of the 6 of us had any experience. And I was allocated Dan Steele. For those of you who are Manchester International Festival fans, you might have been to Utopolis, which was where you were given the box and it had sounds, and you went from premise to premise. So you went from the council chamber, you went to the courts, you went to an examination room. And I didn't know that because I was telling him how good it was. And he said, oh, yes, I did that. And he is extraordinarily good at what he does. Now, not only is he a sound engineer, but he's also a musician. So he provided some of the background music for the work that I'd done. I think mine is different to the others in that, if you like, it's mainly a written script. It does have quotes from Thomas Paine, Mary Wollstonecraft, Quentin Letts, and so on and so forth that reflect back and reflect forwards. Because I mean, Thomas Paine is such a huge character. To actually narrow down his talks down to 2 areas like the establishment and to welfare, it was just extraordinarily difficult. And you will be the judges of it.
Thanks very much, and that podcast will be available to listen to the week after next, which is you'll find out more about it, but there's a sort of slightly peculiar Salford connection with Thomas Paine, but I'll leave that one hanging there. Yes, So we'll maybe have time for any more questions towards the end, but I just wanted to bring in Sam and Ali next from the University of Salford, who we're just going to talk a little bit about kind of academic links to this work, and particularly about how there's creative ways of sharing research, because a really key part of this project has been the duos doing some research into topics, and we're sharing that creatively through podcasts. But Sam, I wondered if I could bring you in here and you would just say a little bit more about that kind of creative link with research.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. It's been such a pleasure hearing such a diverse set of voices to talking about the podcast so far. I've heard the first one in full this morning, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the other ones. And I think what I wanted to talk to you about, and bring in Ali as well, is just that idea of my background is as an artist in working in socially engaged arts practice, which is essentially what everyone here has been doing. And, you know, it's just another term, and, you know, in the same way that community arts practice or public arts practice was bandied around, you know, the sort of in term at the moment is sort of socially engaged arts practice, which is essentially collaborative and participatory work with other people. And I think these podcasts really just show how, you know, especially the idea that, you know, the writers and the artists didn't know each other beforehand, so that, you know, that linking and, you know, what do those collaborations do, and then you two are holding you know, that spark to go off and find other participators to work with, and then you've got that kind of added stress, I guess, of, you know, from all that knowledge that through those conversations that have been held, you know, which bits do you then, you know, as one of the contributors, was it Helen said before about, you know, which bits end up on the cutting room floor, you know. And I think that was a really, you know, interesting, because it's about taking responsibility for other people's lives. And, you know, I think that idea of sort of practice as research is, I think, often sort of that kind of idea of academia, you know, it's written about, it's put away. And yes, obviously, you know, the Working Class Movement Library, books are very important, but you have to actively go out and find it in the book. And there's so many other ways that practice can be shared. So I'd like to bring in Ali Matthews, who's, along with Joe Scott, runs the Practices Research Centre of Excellence in the School of Arts and Media that we both work in. She's also a lecturer in theatre performance, maybe just to talk about some other ways that practice as research can be found and present itself.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think it's really, really great to see these projects, you know, emerging from, you know, collaborations between archives like the Working Class Movement Library and kind of arts production companies like Walk the Plank on the ground, as well as like such a wonderful, diverse audience here today. So yeah, as Sam is saying, I run I convene with Joe Scott, the Practices Research Center of Excellence, and really, sorry, I think that my email notifications are going wild here. Along with my colleague, really what we kind of have realized more and more in over at the University of Salford, which is of course right across the road from the Working Class Movement Library, is that quite a lot of our staff are what we might call artist researchers. So they're, you know, people who, like Sam, like myself, teach from not just a theoretical interest in the field, but also from, you know, being sort of having one foot in the field and having one foot in the kind of you know, hybrid, sometimes quite messy intersections between, you know, industry and, you know, public engagement and then obviously formal higher education. So, yeah, just some of the work that we've been doing is to support colleagues across the School of Arts and Media who work in fields as diverse as, the visual arts. So people, artists who participate in events like, the Venice Biennale, to creative writers who have, wonderful books of poetry and works of fiction and creative nonfiction, to, performance and theater people like myself, to musicians who maybe design, everything from audio interfaces to, finding new ways to record brass bands. So the way that we work over in the School of Arts and Media is really finding ways to help artists articulate what they do as research, and not just for the purpose of sort of retrofitting it as research, but really to kind of figure out how that can move us forward as kind of members of a cultural community. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, but
no, that's great. And because we're very fortunate in lots of ways in the UK that there's publicly funded work. But one of the observations I've made is that when we're reporting, we're often encouraged to report back on audience and participants and artists. And a project like that is hopefully just sort of blurring those boundaries a little bit. And with some of the students as well, do you feel they've got an approach to kind of, having a researcher hat and a creative hat, and are they comfortable doing those different?
I think they are. And I think, along with Sam's been a big part of that. We're getting better as a school at sort of doing something that we call kind of like live briefs for students. So wherein basically what we try to do is find ways of, researchers like myself, productively setting students briefs that get them to do precisely what they want to do. So for example, design something for an event, if they're designers, for example, or, but then, give them that brief in a way that mimics a way that they would have to do it in sort of in the real world. So that then what you're doing is kind of getting students to, rehearse their professionalism, but in a way that has a lot of integrity and where they can immediately kind of see the impact of their kind of engagement with the project. And oftentimes we have the New Adelphi Theatre now at University of Salford. So we're trying our best to do more public facing activity. So we're trying to do more sort of, and we're also trying to sort of continue to expand what we mean by public, which is of course, always a question in the arts, so that what we're doing is not just, booking shows and making events for just our internal academic community, but actually, really trying to reach out to other areas of Salford and beyond to kind of get people in and doing interesting things.
And just to come in on that idea of a live brief as well, I think just the idea of any question as a starting point, so all the podcasts, I don't know if you came up with your own titles or were given titles. How did that work as the groups? Did you decide on your own topics as a group?
No, that Lynette and I did a bit of sort of thinking between us and grouped things together. But okay. all of the titles have changed slightly from the original starting point. But yeah, we sort of deliberately thought starting with a question is a good idea, like you're saying, Sam.
Yeah, and that idea, of having that question, the first thing you have to do is do research in whatever format that is. And I think, often like talking to students, when you get students in a studio and the head in the hands, they don't know what to do because they haven't thought of what a question is, they haven't thought of what they wanted to explore. So they're stuck in this big world where it could be anything and everything, and they could do a project about the world and it just becomes too big. So I love the idea that any question as a prompt is something that is like, right, go get it. And I think especially if there's a kind of a time restraint in there as well, it just forces you to be active and to respond to the question and make something that I think when you throw in collaboration as well and such good resources as the Working Class Movement Library, then as you see, they're bound to be a success.
Great, thank you. Helen, you just wanted to come in and say something.
Yes, I did, because I think it's one of the features of this project that people haven't referred to. But for me, it was something quite new. And, you know, I know you impressed this on the members of the writing group before we met our artist partners, that we were equal partners. And that struck me as being quite a radical arrangement to say, because, you know, artists go off and do all sorts of wonderful engagement stuff, but it's usually artist-led. Okay, you do want people to have a very creative response, etc., and some amazing stuff happens. But this, to me, this was a significant blurring and almost, you know, shall we say, a power renegotiation of a layperson, I can't think of a better term, and an artist to agree not just on what was their, how are they going to develop the overall theme, but the means by which they did it, to approve, you know, to be involved in the whole process. And I think, you know, potentially challenging, potentially very interesting, but something I hadn't come across before.
And Peter, yes, you wanted to come in and say something. You'll just need to unmute, Peter. Great, thank you.
I think there was a real problem for me working out what was on offer in terms of Dan's expertise, his experience, what he was bringing to the project. One of the big things that I got no idea about is how long stuff takes. How long does it take technically to create some music? How long does it take to interview people? Then how to edit those people? Then how long does it take to put the music to the voices? So there's a lot of technical stuff that I had to not learn, but appreciate. So I think one of the things for a future would be about really spending more time. And this is part of the problem with COVID, was spending more time with an artist saying, well, you know, what are you bringing? What am I bringing? How do we work together? And quite clearly, while Sam already talked about the time constraint, I think that was really very constrained by the nature and the type of contact that we could have. So I was struggling with things like over budgeting, in the sense that, oh, well, can you just do this edit? And Dan's saying, have you any idea how long that would take? And I've got to say, I haven't a clue. So there is something about how we contract together and how we understand each other. So I was very, very naive young virgin to this. And yes, so I learned a lot about the artist perspective as well, which was good. But I think coming again, it would mean that I would come with a lot more knowledge and maybe a more appropriate set of questions to ask when I started.
And I think, Peter, that's a really good point. I always think that at the end of a project, I suddenly know what I'm meant to be doing, but I only know it at the end. And at the start, you think you've got an idea, but things often go in a sort of completely different way. But then I think if you do the same project again, it somehow doesn't quite have that curiosity and investigation, because you're, you know, you are sort of learning things in a different way. I don't know if Sam or Ali or any of the other, Hilary, yeah, do you just want to come in next?
Yeah, I really endorse and follow up what Peter was saying there. I don't have quite the same view. I mean, I think probably each duo had a different experience, a different sort of partnership in a way. But I mean, I did know something of the issues around the time factor, because one of the reasons I wanted to join the project, as well as wanting very much to support the library, was to build on the bit of composing and working with sound art that I'd done before. But and I do think actually that actually somehow more in any future work, you know, to plan in somehow more time and more resources for sharing or working out how the partnership's going to work, learning from each other's experience. in other words, I'm basically saying I don't think it's just COVID that made that very difficult. We didn't really have very much time to build up to actually the creative side of actually making and composing our episode. I think if you think editor and writer, I think inevitably that, there are going to be different ways of doing things in different roles, and there could, inevitably be some tensions, and, they'd have to be sort of worked through there. So it's a plug for the future, really.
Yeah, and I think it predate COVID. Actually was launched sort of just before COVID. The Arts Council's next 10-year strategy doesn't mention the word art in it anywhere, and it's called Let's Create. And it's very much taking this view that everybody is an artist. And I'm sort of hopeful that some of the sort of boundaries which can sometimes make things a bit transactional will soften a little bit. And, whether it be from a sort of research point of view, and also whether it be from a kind of collaborative point of view, that sometimes we can find out, being put in labels or boxes. And actually what a project like this shows, that a tremendous amount can happen, when you sort of A, start doing something, and I think B, particularly start working with someone else as well. So there's been some. We're just coming up to 3 o'clock, so I don't know if there's any other final questions before we just hand back over to Lynette for the end. Anybody got anything? I'm just gonna. No. Anybody got anything else?
I just wanted to echo what Hilary and to some extent Peter said as well, where I think that it's really exciting to think about. I think that if COVID has taught any of us anything, it's also that it's refocusing people towards process and away from product, and I think that that's something that we as a collective society can all afford to learn over and over again. And I think that it is really exciting to refocus commissions and projects around methods of collaboration, as opposed to, we're always in such a rush to, get our outputs all shiny and presented, but oftentimes we learn just as much from, the sort of mistakes and sort of clumsy attempts at communication that we run into along the way, and we can learn as much from that. So I just want to kind of echo that point.
Yeah, no, I think I definitely agree that projects were quite often focused on the end results and not on the journey. And the journey and I think the other thing as well is that kind of thing about process is also around ideas. So I'm just going to put a link in the chat, because Lay, who is one of the other duos, and also a writer called Carla Henry, contributed something for a creative care kit, which is called Being the Change, and it's aimed at young people kind of 11 to 20, and introducing them to ideas of social change and radical thinking. So yeah, I've put the link in the chat, and you can sort of see a PDF there. But it's just as there's maybe a blurring between research and practice, I think there also might be between sort of culture and also how things need to change. And I think art and creativity has always been at the forefront of sort of suggesting what those changes might be. So thanks everybody for coming. I'll just hand it back over to Lynette.
Okay, thank you very much. And we've just had something in the chat from Helen saying, what a shame we can't all meet for a cup of tea like we used to. And funnily enough, Ben and Sean and I had been saying something similar before. We were hoping this...
Can you hear me there? Can I just say something
before? Oh yeah, go on.
It's been really like melted my brains at one point, but it's been really enjoyable to do all in all. I'm looking forward to doing more stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Good.
Yeah, it's been brilliant. Really enjoyed it. Will I tell you that before you go?
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Thank you very much. So yes, before we go for our sadly virtual cups of teas, but we'll be all thinking of each other while we do it. I'll just tell you a bit more about the podcast, and I'll put this in the chat as well. So Begin the World Over Again can be found on all podcast platforms, and episode 1 is available to listen to now. We'll be publishing the next 5 episodes over the coming 3 weeks. You can subscribe via Spotify, Google, or wherever you normally listen to podcasts to receive episodes in your podcast library as they are released. Just to note that there's been a bit of a delay with Apple Podcasts, but that should be available in the next few days. More information about the project and links to the episodes can be found on the library's website at www.wcml.org.uk/begin the world over again. And that link is in the chat there. Thanks so much to all who've been grafting so hard to make the podcast happen. And thanks to all of you for joining us. And on a personal note, as we've been thinking about inspiring women, I'd just like to thanks to my mum, who's attended today's event and who sent me the lovely flowers you see behind me. We hope you'll join us again next week, back to our usual Wednesday 2 p.m. slot, when we welcome Carol O'Reilly from the University of Salford. We'll be talking about her book, The Greening of the City, Urban Parks and Public Leisure, 1840 to 1939, which ties in nicely with our second podcast episode on the theme of the outside and the outsider, which you've heard a clip from, and which we'll also be launching next week. This talk has been recorded too and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel shortly. That's youtube.com/WCM Library. And a reminder that our talks are, as usual, free. However, we would like to encourage you to support the library if you're able to do so, and there is a donate button on our website. Thanks again and goodbye until the same time next week. Take care, in solidarity, and very best wishes from all at the Working Class Movement Library.